Hello, and welcome back to AP Human Geography. Today, what we want to talk about is foraging. Now, we've done a little bit of foraging ourselves, but we really want to talk about this whole strategy. What does it mean to be a hunter-gatherer? And first of all, food is necessary for survival, okay? And so the way that you get food is called your adaptive strategy. And there are four big adaptive strategies that are really recognized in anthropology and, foraging, which is what we're talking about now, which is food collection, agriculture, pastoralism, and industrialism, right? And so for the bulk of human history, right, we've had pre-agricultural times, then we move into the agricultural times around 10 to 15,000 years ago, and then we move into what's called the agro-industrial time, and we'll talk about all of these. But specifically when we talk about foraging or food collection, what does that mean? Well, the answer to this is going to be three: obtaining food from wild plants and animals. Domestication is something that happens later, and we are going to talk about this, but when we talk about hunter-gatherers, we are talking about people who are collecting edible items, like plant products, invertebrates, and by invertebrates I mean like worms and bugs and stuff like that, or the hunting of protein or protein and fat sources, and that actually includes fish, so it's really hunting and fishing. Now, really, for longer than Homo sapiens has been around, we've been hunter-gatherers, right? And so Homo erectus did some hunting, Neanderthal man did some hunting, Homo heidelbergensis did hunting, and we hunt, yeah? And so it's not unique to us, this idea of the hunting and gathering. Now here's the other question. Are there still hunter-gatherers today? Because this is a lovely photo, and you can see that this looks to be a very mobile society, one that could pick up and leave at any moment. But this is an old photograph, and the Great Plains certainly don't look like that anymore. So, what do we think about that? Well, it turns out, yes, there are still several hunter-gatherer tribes that exist in various places in the world. So that brings us to your next question. Okay. Where would you be least likely to find hunter-gatherers today? Deserts, temperate climates, tropical climates, Arctic regions, or coastal regions? This is a really interesting question, actually, and it's going to be, the answer is going to be in temperate climates, because it is temperate climates where you see some of the most productive agriculture, right? But also, in tropical climates, you have access to lots of things. In Arctic regions, you're going to probably have lots of meat, stuff like that. So temperate climates are pretty much going to be all agricultural or agriculture based these days. Okay, so when we talk about hunter-gatherer communities, what are we talking about? We're talking about really small groups, 30 or fewer. They have low birth rates, and some people have hypothesized that they have low birth rates because they have this really subsistence living. I mean, they're gathering the food, they're eating it there, they're not really storing things, if you're talking about a true hunter-gatherer society. And frankly, there are not very many true hunter-gatherers that are like, find it, eat it, find it, eat it, find it, eat it. But probably the low birth rates have more to do, I mean, that is probably part of it, but they also probably have to do with the fact that it is hard to carry around babies, right, and follow and find food. They typically have simple structures. There's not a class structure usually. You'll have probably a leader, but there's not like a whole history of chiefs. Now, when you start moving into complex hunter-gatherer societies, you do start seeing these more political structures. But when you're talking about just straight-up hunter-gatherer communities that are temporary, they are moving from place to place, it's going to be a real simple structure. They also need to have simple, light tools, just the basic things for hunting: spears, atlatls, hooks, things like that. Okay. Probably not a lot of boats, because boats would be heavy to carry. There is no private property, right? That comes later, and we'll talk about what that means and how that happens later on. And then there are a lot of anthropologists that have said that they think that hunter-gatherer societies were very egalitarian, and then there were no different roles, and that everyone was equal. And that is highly unlikely, actually, because when you look at modern hunter-gatherer societies today, there's still division of labor. But that division of labor is everywhere, because it's one of the things we're really good at, and we'll keep talking about that later on. But even in hunter-gatherer societies today, there are distinct gender roles. Men hunt and women gather. And that's actually a great strategy, because you can have the meat sources that you need, and you can have all of the plant products and bugs and things like that, fruits, whatever. That would be a plant product, by the way. You can have all of that, and you're getting it at the same time, right? And so it's a very helpful strategy. So everybody is working, but that's different than saying everybody is of the exact same standing or having the same position in society, things like that, you know. Anyway, some say that hunter-gatherer communities are more cooperative than any other communities, but what you'll find is that agriculture also requires significant amounts of cooperation, and so I think it is probably pretty difficult to say, oh, these people are more cooperative because they hunt and gather together versus these people are more cooperative because they have to work the land together. Oh, the other thing about children are really helpful when you're working the land. They're probably less helpful when you're wandering around. Okay, now they had really varied diets. There would have been a lot more meat in higher latitudes, and that goes back to that Arctic. Not a lot of plants, a lot of meat sources. Okay, now to really be a true hunter-gatherer community, you would have to wander. You're going to follow your food source, right? And so if you have a lot of food available in a small area, you may have a fairly small area, but what we really see is that the smallest area would have been about 7 square miles per person, okay, per capita. And if you had not a lot of resources, that can extend out to 500 square miles per capita. So if you're talking about a group of 30 people, that's a lot of area, right? Now, as population densities increased over time and the human population got larger and larger and larger, this may have actually led to conflict. We do find ancient skeletons that women seem not to have these kinds of injuries, but a lot of the males have violent injuries, trauma injuries that look like it's conflict. And so there is this general feeling among lots of anthropologists that the idea of the noble savage, the hunter-gatherers, they were really peaceful and all this good stuff. And there's a lot of evidence that suggests that they're just as violent as any other human. They're just as peaceful as any other human, and that hasn't changed over time. Okay. Now, there is this progression into a complex hunter-gatherer society as people learned to store food and then of course started domesticating food. But storage of food came a little bit later, but that allowed people to be a little bit more stationary. And agriculture turns out to be really only necessary where food is less available. And an interesting fact about agriculture, and again we're going to talk about this, there's a whole unit on this, right? But it arises independently in a whole lot of areas around the same time, and that same time is just after the last ice age, in a period called the Younger Dryas period. And there was some climate change that actually made agriculture more, that you could actually grow more things. Sorry about the loss for word there. But that agriculture would actually work out better, that you could actually start planting things, whereas you couldn't before. Food had been scarce before, and so there's this big push, right, to actually have a stable food source. And so that really could be the source of agriculture everywhere. Now, we start early on these relationships with nature, and so as a hunter-gatherer, you're very close to nature, you're following the herds, you understand their movements, you understand the timing of when fruits and seeds and berries are around and stuff like that. But sometimes we need a little extra help, yeah? And so the first animal that we have a relationship with is the wolf, right? And the wolf later becomes the dog, right? And so we start selecting wolves, right? And probably that's pretty simple. If you start with puppies, they're pretty cute. But there's all kinds of hypotheses on how this actually worked. And that is what we're going to talk about in our case study. And there is a massive difference between wolves and dogs. And so the real question is, how do we go from this amazingly effective elite pack hunter to the cute, look at us, waiting for us to give them instructions kind of fuzzy thing that we have today, right? And so our next conversation really during class is we want to talk about the origin of dogs, right? And so again, their progenitor are wolves. They probably arise somewhere, mitochondrial evidence, some of that has actually suggested as early as 50,000 years ago, but you know, that could be as early as 30,000 years ago, but for sure 15,000 years ago, we've got dogs. And they're hanging out with us. Probably for hunting, right? That seems like a great idea. They also happen to make great companions because, you know, dogs like us and we like things that like us, so we like dogs. And they're also tamer than wolves. But again, this is what we're going to be trying to figure out. How do we domesticate dogs? How does that work? Okay? Because this thing right here is not that thing. Yeah. All right. So if you have any questions, please ask me in class, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening.